The Invisible Boy by Trudy Ludwig, illustrated by Patrice Barton. Can you see Brian, the invisible boy? Even Mrs. Carlotti has trouble noticing him in her classroom. She's too busy dealing with Nathan and Sophie. I notice here that his coloring, the way the illustrator made Brian, is a little bit different than the others. And because he is kind of standing out as a character that's all kind of grayed out, I think Brian must be this boy, and I think he's being referred to or feeling like the invisible boy. Nathan has problems with what Mrs. Carlotti calls volume control. He uses his outside voice inside too much. Sophie whines and complains when she doesn't get her way. Nathan and Sophie take up lots of space. Brian doesn't. When the bell rings for recess, Micah and JT take turns choosing kids for their kickball teams. The best players get picked first. Then the best friends of the best players. Then the friends of the best friends. Only Brian is left, still waiting and hoping. He's looking pretty hopeful, isn't he? But I can tell he maybe feels a little bit, not as happy. I think his coloring kind of tells us a lot. Let's be watching that as our story continues to unfold. JT glances in Brian's direction and just as quickly looks away. We've got enough players for each team, he tells the others. Let's play ball. Now, Brian didn't get picked. Brian is looking really disappointed. He's looking a little sad and lonely. In the cafeteria, Madison and her friends talk about her birthday party. The rope swing over the pool was just awesome, says JT. Yeah, so was the water slide, adds Fiona. That was the best pool party ever. I'm so glad you guys have had fun, says Madison. Everybody did except Brian. He wasn't invited. At choosing time, while the other kids play board games and read, Brian sits at his table doing what he loves to do best. He draws fire-breathing dragons, scaling tall buildings, space aliens locked in intergalactic battles, greedy pirates digging for treasure, and superheroes with the power to make friends wherever they go. On Monday morning, Mrs. Carlotti introduces Justin, a new student, to the class. Brian smiles shyly at him. Some of the other kids sneak looks at Justin, trying to figure out if he's cool enough to be their friend. They haven't quite made up their minds yet. I see Brian smile. I think he might be happy to have a new friend in class. At lunch, Madison and JT watch Justin eat with chopsticks. What's that? Asks Madison as she points at Justin's food. And Justin answers, it's bulgogi. What? I don't know if I pronounced that right. Maybe someone here knows how to say it. Bulgogi. It's Korean barbecued beef. My grandma made it for me. It's really good. Do you want to try some? There's no way I'd eat bulgogi. And the kids laugh. All of them, that is, except Brian. He sits there wondering which is worse, being laughed at or feeling invisible. The next day, when Justin goes to his cubby to put away his backpack, he notices a piece of paper with his name on it. He looks happy about that. Justin, I thought the bulgogi looked good. And it's signed by Brian. Yum. At morning recess, Brian finds a piece of chalk on the ground and starts drawing away. You're Brian, right? Yeah. Thanks for the note. Hey, Justin, Emilio calls from the tetherball court. You're up next. Sorry, gotta go, says Justin. But by the way, that's a really cool drawing, he adds before taking off. Are you noticing anything about our character Brian? Be watching. Back in class, Mrs. Carlotti asks the kids to team up in 2s or 3s for a special project. The kids scurry around the room to pay her off. Brian heads toward Justin. I'm all ready with Justin, says Emilio. Find someone else. Brian looks at the floor, wishing he could draw a hole right there to swallow him up. Mrs. Carlotti said we can have up to 3 people in our group. We're only 2. Come on, Emilio. Let's let him work with us. Okay, I guess. Mrs. Carlotti gives the class directions for the project. Your assignment is to work together to write a story about what you see in the photograph. Use your imagination and have fun. Whoa, cool, says Emilio. What kind of people do you think would live in a house like that? I don't know, but I bet Brian could draw them to go with our story, says Justin. Brian smiles, and he takes out his lucky pen. That was really nice of Justin to include Brian, wasn't it? There they're working. Again, using those pictures to see what else is going on. And there's a whole big passage up here. There's their story. Looks like they made some costumes. It's lunchtime again. Brian's favorite part of the day. Another 20 long minutes of kids talking and laughing with everyone else but him. Brian, he hears someone shout out. Hey, Brian, over here. Brian turns to see Justin waving him over. Emilio nods at Brian as he makes room for him at the table. Cookie? Thanks. Maybe, just maybe, Brian's not so invisible after all. Now, what have you noticed about Brian from the beginning of the story to the end? Look at Brian's coloring as he becomes happier and makes friends. What happened to Brian? And let's look over here. Some questions that we have. When the bell rings for recess, Micah and JT take turns choosing their teams. How did Micah and JT choose those teams? What could they have done differently?